wa Tanzania, mkutano ambao pia unaongozwa na kauli mbiu inayosema matumizi ya fursa za maliasili kwa maendeleo endelevu, lakini pia mchango wa uchumi wa buluu kama ni kichocheo muhimu cha maendeleo. Katika mkutano huu hivi sasa, mtazamaji wa shirika mbalimbali kama vile ambavyo najionea wa Maendeleo wameshafika, lakini pia viongozi mbalimbali wa serikali. Mimi ni Masud Juma kutoka huko ambapo tutakuwa pamoja kutoka hivi sasa hadi tamati ya mkutano huu, na kinachoendelea hivi sasa katika mkutano huu ni uwasilishaji wa hali ya uchumi unavyokwenda hapa Tanzania, ambapo uwasilishaji huo ukigusa katika maeneo matatu: Tanzania bara, Zanzibar, lakini hali ya uchumi ilivyo katika mwaka huu 2022 pia tutapata kusikia katika uwasilishaji huu ambao hivi sasa unaendelea. Nikupe nafasi basi na wewe ambao unatufuatilia hivi sasa kwa kutuangalia kuweza kusikiliza, lakini pia kufahamu kile ambacho kinawasilishwa hapa.
Grain and we know wheat grain, these two are the global suppliers and source to Tanzania. Now, what is the government doing? Considering all these vulnerabilities, the government has intended to focus in enhancing productive sectors while ensuring provision of social services. And for that, it will take some revenue policies, expenditure policies, and the revenue policies over the medium term, it will intend to increase domestic revenue, and this shall be done by strengthening the administration of tax laws to address the challenges of tax evasion and tax avoidance in order to reduce revenue leakages. It will emphasize the use of ICT systems so as to strengthen domestic revenue collections. It will strengthen the measures of tax compliance and, of course, impart the culture of voluntary tax payments. It will ensure efficiency in the government-owned entities which are operating commercially in order for them to pay dividends and contributions in time. It will implement the action plan for blueprint in order to improve the business and investment environment. Coming to the expenditure policies, over the medium term, the government will allocate funds mainly to the priority sectors that stimulate growth. It will maintain discipline and efficiency in the use of public funds, and it will make sure to ensure the fiscal deficit is below 3%. Oh, now just to finish off, I'll recap on the fact that over the past 10 years, Tanzania's performance has been very impressive to take us into becoming a low middle income country, but impressive to make us dodge the bullet of going through recession during the external shocks. Despite this impressive performance, the government is aware of the potential risks that I mentioned earlier, and for that it will pursue and implement economic policies that enhances productive sectors while ensuring provision of social services. And this will enable us to maintain the macroeconomic stability while ensuring growth is sustainable and inclusive. Thank you very much.
Diana. Thank you so much, Diana. Another big hand of applause, please. Thank you so much. That was quite insightful, and let's see how the ball rolls. So now, that was the economic performance in as far as the United Republic of Tanzania is concerned, but partly of mainland. Now, can we hear from Zanzibar? ZPC, please. A representative? Tafadhali, kwa heshima na taadhima, karibu tuambie what has been faring in Zanzibar. Karibu sana.
ZBC kama nilivyokuambia awali, ni wasilishaji ndio ambao unaendelea hapa, ambao anaangaza katika masuala mbalimbali ya uchumi wa Tanzania, ambapo mwasilishaji wa kwanza aligusia katika upande wa Tanzania bara, na huyo ambaye hivi sasa anakwenda kuwasilisha akigusia katika upande huu wa Zanzibar, huku mkutano huko anaendelea, lakini pia tukiwa tunaendelea pia kumsubiri mgeni rasmi wa mkutano huu kuweza kuwasili katika maeneo haya, lakini pia ratiba nyingine zikiwa zinaendelea. Kuna mambo mengi ambayo yatafanyika hapa, lakini pia kuweza kusikia mengi kutoka kwa washirika hawa wa Maendeleo, namna ambavyo wamejipanga kwa ajili ya kuweza kushirikiana na serikali ili kuhakikisha mustakabali wa maendeleo ya Tanzania unaimarika. Moja kwa moja basi nikupe nafasi ya kumsikiliza mwasilishaji wa pili na kile ambacho amekiandaa.
African Community East Africa, before I move through Zanzibar economic growth and then the effect of COVID-19 and the Ukraine-Russia war and the measures that government have been taken before I conclude. For the world economy, as you can see, the economy, this for 2 years, for year 2020 and 2021, and as you can see, the blue is for 2020, and for, okay, so the blue is for 2020, and the yellow is for 2021, and you can see the economy was growing negatively for global economy, but as well as for advanced economy and the developing economies. All of them, they experienced a negative growth for the year 2020, but for 2021, we started to move up to realize growth positively. For next please. For Africa, the situation was the same. The economy was growing at an average of 3.6, an average of 3%, 3.6 to 3.7 before COVID for those 5 years trend. But as you can see, in the year 2020, the year where we had experienced COVID, the economy went down to negative 1.7. For East African community, the situation was the same. For mainland, it has already been mentioned, the economy was 4.8 to 4.9 2021, but other countries, as you can see, the country which realized the high growth for 2021 was Rwanda, which managed to grow by 10.2%. And Zanzibar, as you can see there, by 2020, we grew by 1.3, but for 2021, we managed to get to 5.1. So coming to Zanzibar now, for the GDP growth of Zanzibar, as you can see, for the last 5 years, we managed to realize growth from at around 7%. In 2017, it was 7.7. I can say it was the highest, but then it was 77% in 2019 before COVID. But during the COVID year, 2020, as I mentioned in the previous slide, the economy growth was 1.3, but for 2021, we started to catch up to recover from the COVID pandemic, and the economy grew by 5.1, as I mentioned. GDP per capita, in terms of GDP per capita of US dollars, you can see from the trend we are growing, and the GDP per capita is 1,171, which is equivalent to 2.7 per capita, 2.7 million shillings. For sector contribution, for Zanzibar sector contribution, if you look for the previous 5 years, unfortunately it's mentioned for 4 years, but there is an addition for the last 5 years. For the year 2021 is not there, but you can see the major part or the major contributor to the economy of Zanzibar is service sector, which is blue, where the tourism and others are embodied there, and it reaches 47.8% in the year 2020, but it went down to 47.1% contribution to GDP in the year 2021. The second is agriculture. As you can see, its contribution is around 22.8 for 2020, but it went to 24 in the year 2021. And the third one is manufacturing, which is 19.6, and for the 2021 it is almost the same 22. It realized about the same 19.4. For sector growth, as you can see, the sector which grows because of after pandemic is for 2021. As you can see, the sector, service sector, grew by 6.8%. It grew by 6.6%. 6.8% from negative 0.1 in the year 2020. And this is major because we rely heavily on tourism. And you can see the problem. I will show the number later about the number of tourism who arrived in Zanzibar during this period. Talking of inflation, inflation rate is still managed, where the inflation is about 1.7 in the year 2021. It was 3.4 in the year 2020, and like our brothers, inflation is within the range, because the range for East Africa and for Zanzibar as well is below 5%, and we are within that range of below 5%. For tourism arrival, we have tourists. This is number one contributor now to the economy. As I said, it contributes to the service sector. And this for the past 10 years, from 2012, the tourism number was around 160,000. But for 2019, we managed to go up more than 500 to 538. And in fact, we surpassed the mark, the target for the Vision 2020. For the Vision 2020, we targeted to have tourist number 500,000 by the year 2020. But as you can see from the graph, by 2018, we already had managed to reach to that mark. It was 520 in 2018, and then it was increasing to 2030 something in the year 2020, but it went down to 260 because of COVID. But now it's going up again. The impact here is the tourists, but I will say I'll manage again later on for the tourists from Russia also had impact, and from Ukraine. The external sector, we still have a deficit, balance of trade deficit for Zanzibar. We import more than we exported, and this is the area, as you can see, the number is always growing, and we need to work on this too. I will come up with the recommendation later on. For the capital formation, as you can see from the table, for that we used to have investment, number of investment around 40 for every year from 2017. And for 2020, that is the year where we had COVID, the investment number was 30. But for 2021, after COVID and vaccination and other measures, we managed to have investment, 97 investment from different parts. Most of them are from food, from restaurant, related to service tourists. And the 97 projects realized it was worth 2.6 trillion shillings compared to 223 million, or billion, 223 million in the previous year of 2020. The exchange rate is stable. Of course, there are a lot of intervention taken by BOT, and as you can see, the exchange rate is 2,310 per US dollar, and compared to 2,298, it increased but very slightly because of those policy measures that are being taken by Bank of Tanzania in general. Now I will move to impact of COVID, especially in Zanzibar. The COVID was impacted all countries. Zanzibar was no exception, and it affects all corners. I mean, the spread was economic, but also for social, and it was at the household level, at the family level, as well as at macro level. At the family level, people lost jobs from those who are out of employment, from those especially who are working in tourist areas, but also there are households that depend on remittances, for instance, from friends and relatives who live abroad. also there was a problem, because whatever the problem they were facing there, it came out to their families at home. So at farm level, production, especially for goods related to tourism business, declined. And at macro level, the government revenues declined as well. So I will mention a few sectors that were impacted by the tourists, by the COVID. As I said, COVID affected everywhere, every corner, social and economic sectors as well, health, education, etc. But I will just highlight some as an example on those sectors, the 5 sectors: employment and tourism, international trade, manufacturing, energy and water. For employment, we depend heavily on tourism sector, as I mentioned earlier, and actually there were about 21,319 employees in 2019, with 51%, 10,000 in accommodation and food. So you can see to what extent in Zanzibar people are working in this service sector. And the various reports have shown that 95% of 478 tourist hotels in Zanzibar, ranging from 1-star to 5-star, stopped operation by April of 2020. So most of the hotels closed down, and the cut of the workforce in most of these ventures was over 90%. So when they closed down the hotels, 90% of the employees were also cut down the workforce. They only left with security guards and the gardeners and few, but most of the workers were relieved of their work during the COVID period. Of course, the decline in private sector also it has effects to the other institutions like Zanzibar Social Security Fund, not only to the Treasury, but also to the local government authorities, because they depend also heavily on the services provided by people who are working in those localities. But according to Zanzibar Association Tour Operators, almost all tour operators have closed business during the pandemic. So you can see to what extent it had affected the economy of Zanzibar. And according to Economic Survey 2021, tourist arrival decreased by 51.6%, from 538 realized in 219, as I mentioned, to 260 by 2020. So this was a drop of 51.6%. For international trade, imports declined in April, and if you compare to corresponding months in 2019, but of course the decline was most notable in intermediate goods and the industrial raw materials, consumer goods, food and foodstuff, etc. Import of consumer goods declined by 63% to US dollar 2.6, while that of intermediate goods dropped by 65.1% to US dollar 3.4 million. Of course, there were a lot of problems, and the report showed that there were delays when you import. For instance, some business imported in January, but they were not able to get their stuff by end of March. So you can see these are the kind of issues that affected also the flow of goods and inflation as well. So for manufacturing, most affected manufacturing are those who are producing goods for hotels. Hotels and restaurants depended on most imported raw materials, and most of the factories are the ones producing natural bath and body care products, such as the company called Inaya and Limited and Seawood, whose sales were claimed to have dropped by more than 90%. So those are examples that people lost their job, especially those who are engaged in tourism sector. Factory dependent on local materials, material limited on local materials, were limited, affected by the pandemic. For energy sector also, closure of business, there was problem with the company, for ZECO company, but also for, what? Okay, for their problem with energy company, their projects, their material supply, so they affected their projects that were being carried out by ZECO. Also for ZAWA, there were projects that were implemented by ZECO and ZAWA, especially for electrification or water supply in various shehia of Zanzibar, but these were affected because some of the financiers, there were delays in giving finances or executing the contract. Going to water, as I have mentioned, the water, same as energy, there were problems, especially for implementation of the projects that were implemented during that period. Briefly, for the impact of Russia-Ukraine war, of course, after 2021, we had this war. The economy was trying to catch up, but then came the war, Russia and in. So for tourists in Zanzibar, for 2021, we had a lot of tourists from Russia and Ukraine. In fact, Russia was number one who supplied tourists in Zanzibar for the year 2021. There were about 70,445 tourists from Russia. We used to get more tourists from Italy and the UK, but for the year 2021, Russia took over, and it was number one tourist country who provided more tourists in Zanzibar, and Ukraine also with Poland, but Ukraine was number 5. But if you take tourists from Russia and Ukraine, they were about 85. If you take 70 plus 14, about 85 tourists only from Russia and Ukraine, and this contributed to 21.6. So the number of tourists who came to Zanzibar in the year 2021, which was total, was 394. Out of them, 21%, 21.6 was from Russia. And you can see the effect that for the year 2020, for the year 2022, no tourists from Russia or Ukraine came to Zanzibar. So in 2022, we lost all of them, all the tourists, at least 85,000 tourists who were expected from Russia and Ukraine. Of course, there was increase in oil price because of the war. And if you look into the retail price per liter of oil in Zanzibar, it's 2,440 per liter in December. It was 2,400 in December, but because of the war, currently it's 2,980 per liter. And this with government subsidy. Government is subsidizing oil at least to ease the burden to its citizens. Of course, increase of food price, especially wheat, leading to inflationary pressures. So there are government measures. There are a lot of government measures that have been taken during the COVID pandemic, as well as during the war. So, for instance, government is subsidizing duties, custom duties for food imports, especially rice, wheat, and sugar, where business people used to pay US $600 per ton. Now they are paying 350 per ton. The selling price, the government is setting selling price and executes the price for food products, for non-food products, example, cement and construction materials, to maintain inflation. The government is subsidizing oil products. It subsidized 380 shillings. Yeah, I'm just 1 minute. Subsidizing 380 per liter for petrol, but as well as 878 per liter for diesel. there are other measures where the government review development projects implemented for the year 2021 to give priorities to the available resources. Reduce other charges and they put more emphasis on other services of priorities, but also enhance COVID testing and surveillance measures. Of course, improve tax collection using various measures, example, VFDs. So as a conclusion, I'm concluding, sorry. For conclusion, there are lessons that we learned from this pandemic, but as well as for the war. And of course, as I mentioned, we relied heavily on tourism. So the lesson that we can take going forward is for the economy to diversify. We need to diversify our economy. We are now advocating for blue economy. It's a good move. So I think if you look into the ZADEP, it mentioned a lot of areas where we need to focus instead of just focusing on tourism. So there are others like digital economy, but we have to also to implement import substitution, where we need to focus on producing some issues where products where we can produce locally instead of depending heavily on imports for everything. Of course, finally, we need to partner with private sector, to engage private sector, but as well as development partners and all stakeholders in the development of Zanzibar. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much.
ZBC ni mwasilishaji wa pili huyo ambaye ametoka kuwasilisha masuala mazima ya hali ya uchumi kwa upande huo Zanzibar, ambapo katika wasilishaji wake aligusia maeneo mengi na akagusia katika sekta mbalimbali kwa utalii, lakini pia uwekezaji, lakini pia akagusia katika kipindi cha COVID-19 na hali ambavyo ilivyokuwa. Lakini pia katika upande huo muda mwingi sana ama sehemu kubwa ambayo aligusia ni wakati ule ambapo dunia iliingia katika janga hili la COVID-19, ambapo Zanzibar pia iliweza kuathirika na hilo na kusababisha vitu vingi ikiwemo ukosefu wa kazi, lakini pia wakulima nao kuweza kuathirika, lakini pia mapato ya taifa kushuka kama vile ambavyo tulikuwa tukijionea katika kipindi hiko. Lakini pia akigusia pia hivi sasa katika upande wa sekta ya utalii inavyoathirika na vita vile vya Urusi pamoja na Ukraine, miongoni mwa nchi ambazo zilikuwa zikileta utalii wengi hapa nchini, japokuwa hivi sasa nakosekana, jambo ambalo kwa kiasi limekuwa likisababisha kidogo kuyumba kwa sekta hii ya utalii. Lakini pia akagusia masuala ya mikakati ya serikali, pia namna ambavyo alifanya katika kipindi cha COVID katika kuhakikisha uchumi wa Zanzibar unarudi, ikiwemo wapa punguzo kidogo wafanyabiashara wakubwa, lakini pia kuimarisha masuala ya kodi ili kuhakikisha serikali inarudi katika hali yake ya kiuchumi. Ni baadhi ya mambo ambayo nimekudondolea na kukuangazia katika kile ambacho kimeangazwa katika upande wa mwasilishaji ambaye aliwasilisha kwa upande huo Zanzibar. Tumsikilize mwasilishaji huyu ambaye hivi sasa anafuata akiangazia zaidi upande wa uchumi wa Tanzania kwa ujumla kwa mwaka huu 2022. Tupata nafasi ya kumsikiliza.
The government of Zanzibar, development partner, colleagues, and also all the other participants. We have a room full of participants for this important dialogue. Good morning to everybody. So I just want to start by thanking the colleagues from the Ministry of Finance as well as from the Planning Commission in Zanzibar who have made such excellent detailed presentations on the state of the economy. So it really makes my presentation short, and I apologize if you will hear me repeating some of the things that you have already heard already heard this morning. So just as a background, the World Bank produces the Tanzania Economic Update twice a year. And this is generally on the overall economic performance and the risks, etc. And we also choose one special topic or theme that we explore a little bit more. And then we have the dissemination event with the government, with colleagues from the Development Partner Group, but also the civil society at large. So we had one launch in March this year, and we are expecting to launch the second of the TEUs in November, in a couple of months' time. So what I'm going to present today very briefly is just a little bit of an update from what we had in March. And I want to start off by really applauding the government of the United Republic of Tanzania, both mainland and Zanzibar, for really an excellent job they've done in keeping the macroeconomic stability. It is one of the few countries globally that has been able to withstand the impact of COVID-19, keeping growth positive, though we do know that in 2020-21, the growth rate, according to our estimates, was just about 2%, which brought the per capita growth in income to a negative number for the first time in many, many years. However, that has been reversed since, so we are back in the positive territory of per capita income growth as well. So this is really commendable, and we acknowledge the work that is done by the government, the partnerships that the government has forged with the private sector, with the development partner group, and we all recognize that it's not easy to maintain this path, and you want to use every opportunity to work with the different stakeholders to achieve the development goals that you have. So just very, very quickly, I see that, okay, that's the slide that we have. So the high frequency, no, can we just go back to the first page? I just want to mention also that while we have seen there is a gradual increase in growth, but the poverty levels have really not shown much of a dent. So what does this really mean? It really means that first of all, of course, the numbers of people in poverty are not declining. So that is reflecting the high population growth. But at the same time, the recovery in the growth performance, whereas a kind of a lackluster growth in the poverty reduction, is reflecting the low elasticity of poverty to growth. So that is, that gives us an opportunity and the necessity, in fact, to think what kind of growth are we trying to achieve? Is the growth inclusive enough to raise the people out of poverty and keep them out of poverty? What we have been seeing is people have been going up and down the poverty line, so there's vulnerability is high. And that's one area where we need to focus more on as we go forward. Coming to the high frequency data that we collect, it shows that while the economic activity continues to recover, what do we see? The credit to the private sector is rising. The year-on-year credit to the private sector has picked up, and it went above 10% since January. And I think this was also noted in the presentation earlier. And this is, of course, consistent with the expansion of economic activity in most sectors. And it's really been across a range of sectors. So agriculture, mining, trade, personal loans, and manufacturing have all seen an increase in credit, as well as the credit to the hotels and restaurants. Communications has also continued. Now, you will see from the chart here, the tourism, while it's recovering, and we heard both from Zanzibar and mainland, you see that there is a seasonality in the tourism as recovery as well. with one period, which is, I think it's March to May, where tourism is generally on the lower side, but there has been a steady improvement in tourism activity. So, as I said, overall the macroeconomic framework remains sound, although it has softened a bit due to the impact of COVID-19 as well as the Russia-Ukraine war. And while inflation, headline inflation still is low and it remains within the government's target, there was a sharp increase in the food and energy inflation levels, which I understand contributes about 34% to the overall headline inflation numbers. So while we see the increase in the inflation levels for food inflation and energy inflation, there is particularly energy, the headline inflation remains still within the government's target. There is a slight narrowing of the fiscal deficit in 2021-22, which has been helped by the good performance on the revenue front. So the government has really made a lot of progress in enhancing revenue collection, although it is still a bit below the target that the government has set on the revenue collection side. So there is still scope to enhance that performance. And and also the fiscal deficit has been financed by increased borrowing from the domestic market, as the disbursements from the foreign loans have actually fallen below the targets that the government had. And the Russia-Ukraine crisis has driven the high import bills. So even though Tanzania has increased its exports, it's not been sufficient to compensate for the higher import bill, as a result of which the current account deficit has actually widened. And part of that is being financed through the reserves, which is why you see that the reserves, while still at a comfortable level, have declined in the recent past. So there is, we hope that we will see the reversal and that the reserve levels will continue to come back to the 5-6 months of import cover in the coming months. So I just want to say very quickly about the budget. This is the first budget that has been presented fully by the sixth phase government, and it does reflect a few changes in priorities, most particularly on the agriculture sector. So we see that there is almost a doubling of the allocation for expenditures, the budget that has been allocated to agriculture sector, which is really one of the backbones for the economy, employing a large number of people. And the objective here, and we hope that the government can continue to focus on that, is to see what can the government do to enhance the productivity in the agriculture sector. So whether it is through the irrigation schemes or whether it is extension services, what are the areas that we really need to focus on to enhance the productivity in the sector, which is one of the key ways to make growth more inclusive, especially in the short run when the reliance on the agriculture sector for jobs is still very high. And we also heard earlier amongst the actions that the government is taking to support the population from the COVID impact as well as the Russia-Ukraine crisis, so which has impacted the price of food and fertilizer and fuel, and the government has set aside almost 0.7% to 1% of GDP to subsidize these food, fuel, and fertilizer prices. And we really encourage the government to stay steadfast in revisiting these subsidies and make sure that they are removed as soon as the situation improves. We don't want to fall into a trap which many of your neighbors have fallen into, particularly on the fertilizer subsidies. And Tanzania has done well so far, and I know we have been given assurances from the government that there is going to be an evaluation within 6 months and within a year. So we do look forward to that and see how we can come back to the original pre-subsidy state. Then I just also want to reaffirm what has been said earlier on the risks that the country faces, which are high because of the uncertainty. And the recovery path for Tanzania really depends on not only the external factors around it, but also on the domestic factors. So we project GDP growth in 2022 to be about 4.6%, and which is not too far from what the government projections are. I think over the years I have seen that there is the projections that are prepared by the government and the projections that are prepared by the World Bank and the IMF are coming more and more closer together. So I think that is also a reflection of the rich dialogue that we have and the information that is shared between the government and the World Bank as well. So so the risks really relate to the prolonged impacts of the Russia-Ukraine crisis, the supply bottlenecks and commodity price pressures, and also the risk of further COVID strains that will then impact on the tourism and the economic activity globally, which has, of course, the pass-through effects on Tanzania as well. Domestic risks are largely associated with the slow implementation of policies. Now, these are risks, and the government has taken action on many areas, but we do recognize that there is still a lot that needs to be done to put into action the policies that have been presented by the government. And as you know, that Tanzania has actually moved from a country with a low risk of debt distress to moderate risk of debt distress, which means that now Tanzania is part of the Sustainable Development Policy Framework, and that is really aimed at helping the government manage the debt, so that they can gradually move back from the moderate risk to the low risk category. And we are working together with the government on that front, on debt management. Then we also encourage the government to continue with the vaccination program. We've heard very good progress that has been made in the last couple of months, and in fact, in some regions, the vaccination rates have reached their targets. So we do hope that this continues, and opportunities are also made available for any booster shots as required. And of course, on the macro stability, we urge the government to continue to focus on macro stability, and that would mean, as I said, on the debt management front, on the fiscal policy side, and also the policies that will ensure private sector engagement and higher contributions, higher compliance from the private sector to the rules and laws in Tanzania. So, and lastly, I would like to say that we didn't hear a lot about regional trade, but Tanzania has a huge opportunity for regional trade, and we are very happy to continue to work with Tanzania to see how we can explore further support to enhance the regional trade with the neighbors and beyond. So, and Just finally, just a little bit on the Zanzibar macroeconomic development. I want to start off by saying that over the last year or so, we have started to really bring in more the Zanzibar economic developments into our Tanzania economic updates as well. While we are striving to do that in a very deliberate manner, I do want to make a plea, so to say, to our Zanzibar colleagues to share more information and data with us in a more coordinated manner. It's not just Zanzibar; it's for us also to make that outreach and to be able to get the data so that we can do as much of an analysis as we are able to do for mainland Tanzania. So that would be really appreciated. So Zanzibar GDP has also been affected by the COVID-19 and it's now on the recovery. I see that tourism has really rebounded in Zanzibar as it has in mainland. In fact, it is hard to find a hotel room sometimes. So that's good news for Zanzibar. And just like in the mainland Tanzania, the headline inflation has risen, but it is still within manageable levels and within the targets that the government has set for itself. The poverty rate, it has fallen by 9.2 percentage points in the decade 2009 to 19, and it was 25.7% in 2019. So the urban poverty has fallen more than rural poverty. However, the number of poor declined only marginally as the population growth has been high. So I think this is something that we need to always consider as we are proposing new policies and whatever the government is doing to address the high poverty rates. I think I already talked about the last point that I have on the slide, the economic update. So we just look forward to working more together and continue this very good engagement that we have. And I think I will end there and wish everybody very good deliberations today and tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Another big hand of applause, please. So that being said, it completes a session, a technical session on the economic performance of the country, as well as the numbers and the updates from the World Bank. And since this is a technical session, we might have one or two probably questions in the name of our plenary session. Yeah? And then I'll be requesting the high table that after 2-3 questions, we break for tea, we grab a cup of coffee, and then we are energized. And if the chief guest comes, then we do the swapping. If it doesn't, then we continue with the climate change impacts in the economy. The ushers, please, can I have you going with the microphone? Naomba uende huko tafadhali. Jamani, any quick question?
Wasilisho hilo la mwisho ambalo limewasilishwa namna ya uchumi wa Tanzania ulivyo hivi sasa mwaka huu ndani ya mwaka 2022 kutoka kwa Benki ya Dunia. Kinachoendelea hivi sasa basi ni kwa washiriki wa mkutano huu kuweza kuchangia kile ambacho kimewasilishwa, na baadaye basi kwa mujibu wa mshereheshaji kutakuwa kuna mapumziko kwa ajili ya upataji wa chai, kisha baadaye shughuli nyingine kuendelea hapa kwa namna ambavyo ratiba itakavyokuwa inazungumza.
This meeting, grand meeting. So please, Mheshimiwa Chair, if you don't mind, naomba nikupe microphone, lakini kuna sessions zingine tu harmonize tuweze kuona tunafanyaje ili angalau ufanye hili kwa sasa. Tafadhali. Kwa heshima na taadhima. Tafadhali.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, according to our timetable, as I've been notified by the moderator here, so we'll be having some questions, and I would like now to invite anyone will ask maybe some questions, and the presenters will be ready to make any clarification. However, because it's now an interactive session, everyone can have some sort of elaborations or clarification if need be. So the floor is open for anyone to proceed with a question. If there's any question. Okay, I see here a hand. Welcome.
Asante sana. Mimi ni Helen Fitch, ubalozi wa Canada. My question is this. In the first presentation, there was discussion on some of the macroeconomic controls that the government of Tanzania has put in place. One of them which was a reduction in the discount rate to reduce inflationary pressures and to stimulate the economy. And Permanent Secretary or the presenter, perhaps you can explain to us why that is, that you've reduced the discount rate. Certainly in Western countries, it's all about increasing interest rates to combat inflation. So it'd be good to just get a little more context on why there was a reduction in the discount rate.
Okay, I think it's better to take note of those questions and then we'll proceed with the reply. Okay, I see a hand over there. Okay, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Muhajir from the Ministry of Finance. Yeah, my question goes to the presentation from the World Bank. I've seen that you are discouraging subsidies for inputs in the agriculture. That's right. You are saying if the situation improves, then we should eliminate them. Yes. Now suppose that you are sitting in the Ministry of Finance, especially in the Department of Planning, at the think tank for this country. What do you think could be the best intervention in the agricultural sector to make it productive and contribute that share to the GDP and make it attractive to the youth employment? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. Okay, dear colleagues, the floor is open for question and answers. I would like to have more hands, but not, okay, I have seen a hand here. Welcome.
Asante sana. Jina langu Abdallah Sadala Mabodi. Napenda kuuliza, especially to the last speaker, kwamba to insist to open the window to intra-African trade so that Tanzania can benefit from it. I don't want only to say Tanzania can benefit, but how do we improve the microeconomic state by opening the window of intra-African trade? Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that question was directed to Prite. Okay. Okay, I have seen a hand there. Yes.
Thank you very much, Chair. My name is Donald Imari from Repoa. I have two quick interventions. One relates to the question that Helen just asked. I know that the discount rate were reduced to respond to the need to increase credit to the private sector at that time and to stimulate money supply after the economic slowdown. And now that we are seeing inflation increasing, but the nature of that inflation appears to be more structural, driven by costs. I have heard that there are plans by the central bank to try to mop up liquidity, and my question was if that is the right strategy, given that the inflation that we are seeing is most likely not demand driven, and therefore that strategy may be a mistake. So just wanted to raise that question or a caution. The second one relates to the agriculture. I commend the government of Tanzania for increasing the budget for agriculture, almost doubling. But it all now remains to be seen what components of that spending to ensure that agricultural productivity increases, so that even at low prices, farmers can still break even and ensure that food supply is. So I recommend that the government actually implement independent public expenditure reviews, so that we can try to see the extent to which the increased budget is actually targeting intervention that will increase productivity and sustain agricultural production. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much for those two questions. Yeah, now, okay, I have seen a hand. Okay, you are welcome. Okay, Ashas, can you bring a mic to the honorable here? Okay, yeah, just give him.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Hamis Said, Deputy Principal Secretary, Ministry of Information, Youth, Culture and Sports. Thank you so much for wonderful presentations. And I've got two questions to a colleague from World Bank. And I just wanted to get a technical experts' advice on the opportunity of exploring oil and gas as an alternative measure to the economic development. What are their advice on that particular area? The second question is more focusing on the other economic drivers apart from what we have had here. Is there any kind of recommendations that you are putting forward on the table in this discussion that we may need to consider in terms of improving our economy? Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much for those two questions. Now I have seen two hands there. Yes, start with yeah, okay, start with that, and then we'll accomplish to the last one.
Habari za asubuhi, jina langu ni Kate Somvangsiri, mimi ni mkurugenzi mkazi USAID. My question is related to the World Bank's analysis about the growth rates, but the persistent poverty rates. I'd like to get a sense from the ministry, just at a big picture, what strategies you're employing to ensure that growth going forward is more inclusive. I know that's a big question, but just kind of a big picture you're thinking on that. And relatedly, the interventions that are mitigating the impact of Russia's war in Ukraine, how do you ensure that those interventions are more targeted to help make sure they're mitigating the impacts for the poorest of the poor? Thank you.
Okay. Okay, let's proceed with the questions. Welcome.
Asante. Habari ya asubuhi, ninaitwa Mags Gaynor, naibu balozi katika ubalozi wa Ireland. Thanks for all the presentations. I had two questions, well three, but Kate already gave one. One is on the projected inflation. So I understand these figures are 12-month inflation. And do you have an idea of what inflation might look like by December? And the second is on the fuel subsidies, and just to understand what the decision points are and any exit strategy out of the fuel subsidies. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much. I saw another hand here on the front line. Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you, Chair. I am Wellington Chibebe, Director, ILO, International Labour Organization, responsible for those in perpetual labor. My two questions related though are that given the figures that we were shown regarding the loss of employment, we would also want to know whether or not there were any special social safety nets put in place during that period. That's number one. Number two, we are also impressed by the approach in terms of building back better and economic recovery. But what we would want to know is what is the strategy in terms of locating those who lost their jobs? Are they being tracked in order to come back or the employers are looking for new employees, particularly when it comes to long service commitments? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now we have almost 11 questions, but we are asked by 8 participants here. So I would like to welcome the presenters so that they can respond on some areas. However, other members of various organizations can also chip in just to make more elaborations. So I would like to start with the Minister of Finance and Planning. Yeah, can you please come here? It's better, I think, if you can respond. No, you can just come in front of people here, so that once you are responding, also can be seen by others, because you are as if you are just take a mic. You can whether respond there, or you can just come to the podium. Do you have any representative from Central Bank? Central Bank?
They're busy, they're working on interest rates.
Okay, proceed with the...
All right, just to give a quick response on why we decided to decrease the discount rate from 7 to 5%. This was imposed during the COVID pandemic, and this was meant to boost the aggregate demand in order to boost growth, because if people could obtain loan at a lower cost, then it would automatically stimulate consumption and for people to continue producing in order again to boost growth. About having the PER review, the government has also is focusing in allocating more of its budget to the priority sectors, and mostly the development sectors, and for that, agriculture being the backbone to the economy of the country automatically will have a larger share of the government budget. Just to pick up on any question. Yeah, I think I captured those ones.
There are some issues. I don't know whether Deputy PS, Mr. Mafuru, if you can maybe provide more emphasis on the issue of the inflation, as well. There was another concern regarding the subsidy for agriculture, because I know you was part of the process.
Maybe just to add on the subsidy for agriculture, the government has imposed the zero value added tax to the locally produced fertilizers and edible oil in order to increase production and reduce the prices in the country, as well as also creating more employment. So those are among the intervention measures the government has put in place.
Okay, thank you very much. I think Mr. Lawrence Mafuru, who is a Deputy Permanent Secretary for Ministry of Finance and Planning, in charge of economic management. And fortunately, he is also a board member of the Central Bank.
On this last one, I haven't even attended one meeting, but I will try.
Yeah.
So I guess the response on the discount rate is exactly what it is, that it was meant to stimulate aggregate demand and so on, to be able to allow even on the private sector to be able to access credit and invest the money into productive sectors of the economy. I think that's the bottom line. On the subsidies, I think it's both on agriculture, on fuel subsidies, the point where decision points, obviously the outlook was the hiking of the world market prices, and therefore we took a view that towards the end of the year we anticipate prices to decline, and therefore our subsidy is targeted towards the end of the year. So it's a 5 months or 6 months intervention. We will assess the situation, but already it's already clear that the markets are looking better from where we're coming from, and therefore we will assess whether we want to continue with the intervention or not. So decision point or decision criteria was the prices. When do we revise that? I think it's going to be towards the end of this calendar year. That's when we will look at what do we want to do next. As for agriculture, the subsidy there is meant to align with the government strategy to make agriculture a lot more productive. And therefore, one of the important components there is fertilizers. And again, on the back of the rising prices on fertilizer on the global markets, the intention there was to make it a lot more accessible, and alongside other agricultural inputs. And again, this is also going to be a full year fiscal observation to align with the season. So depending on how the market again behaves, this particular season we are going to support it fully, and then we will again take a view in the next fiscal year. So because of the uncertainties, we plan as we go. We don't have a panacea of what needs to be done crystal clear, and we will be looking at and reviewing it as and when situations change on the global markets. PST, I'm not sure if there's anything else you wanted me to talk about in terms of the questions that were asked.
Yeah, I think for the moment, yeah, you can end up there. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for those clarification. Maybe just to put more emphasis, you know, there has been so many measures that the government has took with regards to containing inflation. And of course, if you remember, the central bank created a special policy package for 1.5 trillion Tanzanian shillings, and this was just to enable commercial banks to access, even if they will minimize the interest rates. So as well, you can be aware that even we were compelled to lower even the coupon rates. Yeah, previously the rates were too high. For 25 years bond, it was around the 15.94. Then we saw that most of the people were more attracted to take those coupons, and then we were compelled even to revise those. The essence was to enable people more be engaged with the productive activities, because when we conducted the research, we saw that the profit margin for most of the business were around 10 to 25%. So we saw that many people were just providing funds to buy those coupon rates, and the coupons prices, if are still more attractive, means you are collecting more funds from the money circulation and you're holding within the central bank. So we just minimized the coupon rates to the tune of around the 2.2 percentage point. So the rest, the higher one, went down to around the 12.25. So by doing so means we are now enabling people to retain funds and use those funds for many other productive activities instead of providing those funds to the government. So there has been a lot of measures that have been taken by the government, and these were some of them, of the interventions. So let me call now there was and the second presentation was for the Zanzibar Planning Commission. I don't know where the presenter, Zanzibar Planning Commission, Mr. Makame? Yeah, there were around 3 questions, I think, including the one from ILO, where people lost their jobs and were asked whether there were any intervention to provide cash as a means of social safety net. Okay, welcome to respond for
thank you.
Those questions.
I just managed to get one question from ILO. Yeah, but the current laws, I think, does not provide means for support, as far as I understand. But maybe there are other experts from the social here, they can help. But what I understand that they were not given any there are no social safety net for people who lost their jobs, especially those who lost their job in the tourist industry. But the measure that were taken is to provide some loans to various entrepreneurs, especially when we receive funds from the IMF, the money to support those who are affected by the COVID. So those are the funds that were used to support various groups. But for individuals, those who lost their job at the hotel, I can't remember if there are any provision for support in terms of giving funds. So that's the only question I received from my side.
Okay, thank you very much. I think there are other more clarification from other speakers. Okay, I see the Permanent Secretary, President's Office, Finance and Planning. You want to clarify more? You're welcome.
Actually, I was looking for the Managing Director ZSSF, if he's here. But actually, we are in the process of developing workers' compensation fund at the moment, and unemployment benefits at the moment, and this of course is on the way, and yet I think to be concluded by the higher authorities in the cabinet. But of course, this is in our vision that is going to be sooner, most probably before end of this fiscal year. But I was also heard from one of the person asked about how do we actually improve agriculture to support in sustaining the economy. I think one of the things that I would they are not working. Oh, okay. Is value addition in agriculture. Actually, our policy now is focusing on intensive farming, intensive production, but also value addition and in the industrialization. This is one of the areas that, of course, we are putting more emphasis, making sure that we are improving actually the quality and the value of agricultural activity in the farms. I think that is all I think I've heard about what is related to. to Zanzibar. Chair.
Okay, thank you very much for those clarifications. Now, I would like now to call the World Bank just to respond for the remaining questions. I think he has almost around about 4. So, welcome for the clarification.
P.S., thank you very much. I think many of the questions have already been answered by colleagues. So again, the advantage of coming in the end is that, you know, many of the things have already been said. Just a couple of points from my side. I think one participant asked about what are the drivers of growth, what is the bank advising. I mean, definitely the bank is not in the business of picking winners and losers in per sectors, but I just want to say more broadly what is really necessary for the economy to really be able to grow to its potential. And as you all know, the Human Development Index for Tanzania is really, no, Human Capital Index. Let me say there's a distinction between the Human Development Index, which is also low, but the Human Capital Index is very low. And we have heard time and again the skills gap that is hindering the realization of potential in many sectors. In fact, a lot of people, the skills mismatch between what is being taught in schools or in training colleges and what is asked for by the private sector, that is really an important gap that needs to be filled. I think there is also a huge potential for Tanzania to take advantage of the digital space. I mean, there is a lot of scope and a lot of potential to increase that so that we can have the foundations for the digital economy that will contribute to growth as well. And then, of course, we cannot put aside the role the private sector plays. And so what can the government do in terms of the policies and the regulations that will really encourage the private sector to come in and do honest business in Tanzania? That's, I think that was what I will say on that front. And the question on oil and gas, I'm sorry, but I do not have any answer to that because, I mean, we are, as an institution, we are less and less involved in oil and gas sectors. But that is, of course, something of a much bigger discussion than for me, a representative from the World Bank, to come and say to the government what they should be doing in the oil and gas sector. So my apologies, I'm not, as they say in the US, I take the fifth on that one. But and then there was also a question on agriculture and public expenditure review. I'm very happy to note that actually we have been working with the government on an agriculture public expenditure review, and that will become available in the next few weeks time. So you know, value addition is an important point that has been made by the PS for agriculture. Agribusiness, lots of potential, but we really need to add value to agriculture to raise the productivity of the sector as such. So I think that was it. PS, anything else that, I mean, there'll be other opportunities for us to talk as well, so I want to not take too much time. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for those clarifications. We really appreciate for all the presenters, the way they have responded on those questions. Now, according to our timetable, we are now through with this session, including questions and the responses. So, the moderator, you can take the floor and proceed with the arrangement.
Thank you so much, the chairperson, and thank you to the presenters. Another big hand of applause to everyone, please. Yeah, that's being said, it concludes one session. Now, because of time, I would like that we break for coffee at 30 minutes coffee break, Swiss time, yeah? Some lenience, German time, right? So please, this is exactly 10 past 11. Can we break for tea, which is served right at the ocean-facing side? Then we resume here exactly at 11:40.
Huu ni mkutano wa majadiliano ya kimkakati baina ya serikali ya mapinduzi ya Zanzibar na washirika wa maendeleo, mkutano ambao umeandaliwa na ofisi ya Rais Fedha na katika upande kule wa Tanzania bara, Zanzibar, lakini pia baadaye kikamilishwa wale ambao waliwasilisha mada hizi. Hapa tulipo hivi sasa, mtazamaji, kuna mapumziko. Basi na moja kwa moja sina budi ni kurejesha studio kwa mapumziko mafupi. Baadaye tutarudi tena kuja kuendelea na mkutano huu, na tutakwenda kwa mujibu wa ratiba zilivyo hapa kwenu huko studio.
Laiti kama kazi inayofanywa na CAG ingefanywa vile vile kazi kama hiyo na vyombo vingine vinavyotakiwa kutusaidia kushughulikia haya, yasingerudia. Zaeka, nataka mjitathmini sana. Ripoti ya mwaka jana nilikupeni Zaeka, nikakwambieni ipitieni, watafuteni wenye matatizo. Sijapata jibu mpaka leo tunapokea ripoti ya pili. Kuna wizi mkubwa wa wazi, wizi uliotokea Wizara ya Ujenzi, wizi uliotokea Wizara ya Afya, wizi uliotokea ZRB. Hakuna hatua zilizochukuliwa na ni wizi wa wazi, na baadhi ya katika haya niliyoyasema, wale walohusika na wizi huu wamekiri kwamba wamechukua hizo fedha. Mambo yote niliyoyapeleka Zaeka, sijasikia hata mtu mmoja anofikishwa kwenye vyombo vya dola, kwenye vyombo vya sheria. Kulikuwa kuna fedha zilizotolewa na Wizara ya Kilimo za ununuzi wa mbolea, haikuletwa mbolea, hatua haijachukuliwa mpaka leo. Fedha zinazopotea ZRB, juzi wamegundua watu wa mtandao ZRB wanauchezea ule mtandao, wameiba tena. Baada ya mimi kuwa nimekwenda ZRB nikalisema hilo na nikakupeni nyinyi Zaeka mlifanyie kazi, hamkufanya chochote. Matokeo yake watu wameendelea kuiba tena, hii mara ya pili. Zaeka lazima mjitathmini, hamtusaidii. Sijawahi mimi kuona taasisi yenye jukumu la kuhakikisha mnapambana na rushwa na kuzuia uhujumu wa uchumi katika miaka miwili za utawala wa serikali hii, hakuna kesi iliyokwenda mahakamani. Sasa mtakuja mtanambia kuna tatizo la DPP, kuna tatizo la polisi, kuna sawa, yapo, wala sikatai, yapo wakati mwingine. Lakini basi hata kesi moja.
Shani ya Mola ni kipindi ambacho kinachoonyesha shughuli mbalimbali zinazohusu watu wenye ulemavu katika masuala yao ya kisiasa, kiuchumi na kijamii. Usikose kuangalia kipindi hiki kila siku ya Jumatano saa 11:30 jioni na marudio ni siku ya Alhamisi saa 4:30 usiku. Hapa ZBC. Shani ya Mola. Mbuyu ulianza kama mchicha, na katika kuthibitisha haya usikose kuangalia kipindi cha maoni ya watoto kwa picha, kipindi ambacho kinaonesha umahiri, maono na ndoto za watoto kupitia michoro ya aina mbalimbali. Ni hapa ZBC kila siku ya Jumatano saa 10:30 jioni na kurudiwa siku ya Alhamis saa 11:30 jioni. Usikose.
Safari. Tutatembea, tutaona uso na macho.
Naitwa nani? Jeshi.
Hapa. Padamu hapo. Tukiwa na Sheha mtaani kwako. Mambo ni mengi, ukieleza machache.
Nishatiwa ng'ombe. Ushamuibao.
Mie nitafikisha ndani ya safari.
Kila siku saidiaje? Usaidiaji wetu si hawa sana. Kuna kipindi wanakuja kutoa malalamiko yao kupitia makamu wa pili wa rais. Ndio. Na makamu wa pili wa rais alipokuja akatoa maagizo.
Kila siku ya Alhamis saa 3:30 usiku na marejeo Jumapili saa 8 kamili mchana ndani ya ZBC TV. Usikose kutazama hii safari. Unakosaji? Kina baba, kina mama utawaona. Safari. Akina dada, akina kaka utawaona.
为什么现在变得喋喋不休？我是阿优，优秀的优。